this section, inshallah, is going to be a question and answer session. We're going to open it up. Any questions that you have or anything like that, we're here to be of assistance, inshallah. And there's 4 of us, so if one of us can't answer, the other one should be able to do so, inshallah. Yeah, so you can ask any question you want that you might feel like, within reason, obviously. We're not going to give you a fatwa here. But within reason, ask whatever questions you want around this topic or any topic that you feel comfortable, asking questions about. Yes.
I'd like to ask about. Wait for the mic.
Oh, sorry.
My question is about why liberalism is problematic from democracy point of view.
So the question was, how can liberalism be problematic from a democratic point of view? Don't forget, there are different types of democracy and different kinds of liberalism. I think we should be clear about that to begin with. So the initial democracy that was put forward by the ancient Greeks, which comes from the 2 Greek words demos and kratia, basically literally means people power. People power. And it took a direct form. So in other words, people would come up and they would try and answer public questions, etc. And then it evolved into representative democracy because it was very difficult for that to be maintained, for basically a whole populace of, let's say, 1 million people, to answer, every little question that they have in terms of politics, etc. It would be unimplementable. Social liberalism, economic liberalism, and political liberalism are problematic in so much as the following. Number 1, in democracy, the assumption is that you have 1 vote per person. Yes. In liberalism, the equality premise also stands. So there's something in connection with those 2 things. In implementation, most, if not, I'm not going to say all, but the vast majority of countries that have democratic systems, they have a system of what you call electoral representation. So I'll give you an example of Great Britain. They have something called first past the post. First past the post. I don't want to go into too much detail, but the idea is if you vote for a bigger party, a bigger political party, you have more of a voice. If you vote for example, we have a party called the Green Party, you have less voice. So the bigger the party that you vote for, the more you have of a voice. But that contradicts the equality premise of liberalism, because how and why should you be given a higher voice just because you support a bigger party? That's why smaller parties, they want proportional representation. But the problem still stands. How can you maintain equality and at the same time have a democratic system which is completely unequal from that perspective? This is one of many examples in implementation. Other things include, for example, in relation to economic liberalism. Once again, the democratic premise is that we should have equality among citizens, even though, ironically, in the beginning, they didn't allow women to vote, They didn't allow women to, they called them the idiom, I think. It's like the women, the children, and the slaves, they couldn't vote back in the days until 1917, whatever it was, in Great Britain, and then thereafter in other countries. I think Canada was actually first. Anyways, the point is that, yes, so with democracy from that perspective, we said that the equality premise couldn't stand with liberalism, because liberalism is in the pluralism of many ideas, panoply of ideas. You're going to have some ideas which have more power than others. For example, in electoral campaigns, those who have more money, economic money, are going to be able to do more media campaigns and so on. And so they're going to be able to have a bigger campaign, and the democratic rights of those with smaller parties are once again going to be curtailed. So equality is a problem for both democracy and liberalism. And you can't maintain equality and either democracy or liberalism. This is a problem. So both of those things can contradict at times. Does that make sense? I can give you some more answers, but inshallah that will be another longer question. Do you want to add to it, inshallah?
Any other questions?
In the front, was there a question?
I think there's one over there.
Okay, that one first and then.
Thank you for the very enlightening talk. My question, or maybe comment as well, many agree that the Muslim Ummah is suffering from the crisis, intellectual crisis, and also spiritual crisis, ranging from caused by extremism, radicalism, and liberalism, branch out from neo-modernism. This group, namely liberal Muslim, has liberalized or have liberalized Sharia, liberalized Aqidah, and also the Quran. And the other problem as well is that there is another group, conservatism, which undermine the role of reason. So these are the phenomena today, which is in either case, give problem to the Ummah. What is your comment on that? Thank you.
Got a question? You can add to it if you want to.
No,
You don't want to add to it?
Sorry, was that a question or a comment?
Your comments.
Okay, so what exactly was the question? I mean, I know.
The question is that the role of neo-liberal Muslim, like liberal Islam in the case of Indonesia, for example, that liberalized Sharia, which is very serious, liberalized Aqidah, which they introduced religious pluralism, and so on and so forth, which is very serious and challenging to the Aqidah of Muslim.
Okay, so I believe you mean like they're trying to self-interpret the Quran and the Sharia as they see fit in the society.
Yes, they are too liberal in interpreting the Sharia and the Quran and other fundamental belief of Islam.
Yeah, I mean, you want to? Yeah, go on, please.
What I think it is it's a case of when a nation becomes weak, they like to imitate those who are in power. Liberalism, there's no such thing as liberalism, Islam. Islam is we submit to God's will according to our sources. So liberalism is something that there are certain Muslims who want to whitewash Islam to please the colonialist masters. We're still suffering from colonialism. This is the after effects of a couple of centuries of being ruled by dominant forces, and we're still affected mentally to this day. And because of that, we get other Muslims who go to the other extreme to counteract the liberals, and they end up being extremists. In Surah 2, Ayah 143, we are told to be a middle nation. We shouldn't be liberals, we shouldn't be extreme, we should be in the middle path, which is follow the Quran and the Sunnah and do not give your own opinion, but judge according to what the sources say. That's the only way to be successful as a ummah, by trying to work out what is Allah's will regarding any matter, and not trying to force our own opinions and thoughts on our sources.
Is that good enough, sister?
Thank you.
Because obviously, I mean, the deen is something that we shouldn't interpret ourselves as we have got the ulamas. We have got something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He sent messengers, and these messengers were appointed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they imparted not only the message that was revealed to them from Allah, but they also implemented in their life with the actions, like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and also the messengers before them. And today we don't have any prophets, so that prophethood is no more after the last messenger, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And now we have their ulamas, and they are the ones who are responsible in terms of interpreting and also educating the masses. And if the young people and also the others, if they stop basically taking knowledge from these qualified ulamas, then they will be basically lost, because they'll start interpreting, and everything is subjective then. You don't have any uniform way of practicing anything in your deen. Even the 5 pillars, they'll have some sort of self-interpretation. We have certain sects called the hadith rejectors today, and these people, what they do is like they interpret the Quranic ayahs by themselves. So you ask them how many rakahs you pray, and they tell you, oh, we just pray somehow, anyhow we want. Basically, Allah tells us to pray, but He doesn't specify how many rakahs. So we just pray how many we want, when we want, so on. I mean, not exactly, like I said, even they amongst themselves do not agree about the rulings of these particular things. So yeah, I think taking the knowledge from the ones who are more knowledgeable. This is also something that's advised in the Quran, and the ulamas, I think, fit that particular description. Inshallah, I mean, hopefully that answers your question.
Assalamu alaikum. I have two questions. Number one is, how did the liberalism idea get so successful? Which methodologies did they use for bringing their dawah in, first of all, in the West, among their own population, and then exporting to also other countries? Number two is, as Muslim, what can we learn from the dawah or the job? Can we use the method to our own dawah, spreading Islam with the same way?
You want to take that? You give the first one, you answer the second one.
I'll answer the first one, inshallah, and Mansour will answer the second one. So, why did it become very successful? Is because of the wars that made it very successful. For the most part, there is a degree of acceptance, social acceptance as well. So we can't be completely one-sided in our response here. Some of the wars include, obviously, the colonization of the Americas in particular. That was a very, very important thing. I mean, after the Age of Discovery, and they found, because the Age of Discovery and all those things that happened coincided with the time when liberalism was becoming popular. And when new nations were being built now, for example, United States of America and France in particular, those two nations, when they were being built and they had their own kind of documents, legislative documents or constitutional documents, even in the case of both of those countries, they made it quite liberal. I mean, it is a liberal state in a sense, right? And when we say liberal here, we're not talking about left-leaning politics. We're talking about the philosophical liberalism of John Locke, Montesquieu, Voltaire, and so on. And so therefore, obviously, checks and balances, separation of powers, that was all there. Social liberalism became very popular after that as well. So, first and foremost, the colonial expansion into the Americas, the establishment of those nations as, in a sense, liberal states, and then thereafter, the Napoleonic Wars, which were very much barbaric, to use words that they would use for religious wars, very successful at the same time, and obviously very influential in the spread of liberalism, not only in the Western world, because obviously the Napoleonic Wars were in the West, but also into the Eastern world. As you guys know, Napoleon went into Egypt and many of those countries as well, and there's many records of how Egypt was liberalized through such an invasion. And obviously the colonial experience. I mean, when England, or Britain, as it was known, the British Empire, became the largest empire in the whole world, France was not close behind, far away behind, and all those European nations colonized the world. Liberal ideas then trickled down into Africa and into Asia and into the Middle East and so on. So all of those things that happened, obviously, and there's a degree of social acceptance. And don't forget, it's a very attractive ideology as well. Let's be honest. I mean, the reason why liberalism is a very attractive ideology is because it appeals to your sense of impulse. Yes, I mean, totally. I mean, liberalism appeals to your sense. Just do it. Enjoy your life. All those things. I mean, that's a very, very powerful ideology from a psychological perspective. Just giving someone the ability, or perceived freedom, but the ability to experiment in all those ways that were once seen as taboo. So, because it's quite an attractive ideology from that perspective as well, it was accepted, and people don't want to leave it for, let's say, for example, more restrictive ideology. It's difficult to go from this lifestyle to that lifestyle. So, for all of those reasons, I think liberalism has become quite successful. And don't forget, there were wars like the Cold War, which polarized the world, in a sense. liberalism versus communism, people were forced to choose. There was a great deal of ideological pressures that the United States of America in particular put into the media project, films being made, Hollywood, Bollywood, whatever it is. I don't know what they have here in Turkey. Do they have an alternative? It's Hollywood, something like that, yeah? And so on, right? So that's what's happened. So all of those factors combined make it pretty much the dominant paradigm or dominant ethic in the West.
The education system.
And the education system, education system, all those things. And I think that's what's made it successful.
Just moving on from there, you see, to remedy a problem, first it's important to understand the cause of the problem. Right? Often we don't realize what problems are associated with liberalism, and because of not understanding that this is a problem, because liberalism, or the idea of, one can individually choose or even collectively choose as individuals, because it seems to give progress, because you now have unlimited free thought. Your thoughts are not somehow restricted anymore. You can just do, you can just want, you can just wish, whatever. Of course, there are some limitations imposed by the society for reasons, society function of the society. But the appeal is there because you have no restrictions. Because as Brother Muhammad Hijab pointed out, the reason why it's appealing, because it's going through your impulses, because you feel like you want to be happy, right? You want to have enjoyment. You want your wants and desires, then it's like never end of it. So one of the things you will see Islam also highlights is the purification of yourself, where you somehow realize internally that there are going to be this dichotomy between what I want and what I should not do, because there is do's and don'ts. As a Muslim, when you submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what have you done is you are sincerely saying, I willingly submit. What does submission means? You've already surrendered. What have you surrendered from? Who have you surrendered to? There's a surrendering of your will. Now that will be willingness to do something what Allah has already commanded not to do, right? You are saying, no, I am surrendering my will to what Allah and His Messenger wants. So when we look at this idea of liberalism, of course it's going to appeal to everyone, and especially people who are irreligious, who have no religion whatsoever. They don't have any belief in a deity or God or a creator. What they have is their own self, what their self wants. Of course, to them success is what makes them happy. If wealth makes them happy, they will want to be wealthy. If power makes them happy, they want to be more powerful. If dominating others makes them happy, they want to be more dominant than others. That's why the people go into war, because they have their power and their land, but they still want to go and expand on others and have more power, right? So, looking at the Islamic perspective, as Muslims, if we know that this struggle between the needs and the wants and what we shouldn't do, because we are created here for a reason, first and foremost. The reason we are existing is because Allah placed us in this world for a reason. That a purpose is set, you fulfill this purpose, and then you will have successful afterlife in Jannah, where there's eternal happiness, joy, bliss, tranquility, and peace. So you have to maintain the boundaries that is set. Now boundaries means what? Restrictions, isn't it? Whenever we have a boundary, it means a restriction. You will be restricted from unlimited enjoyment, unlimited greed, unlimited envy, unlimited, all of these things, there will be restrictions. So Muslims need to reclaim their Islamic understanding, right? You need to go back to what makes a Muslim, what is a Muslim, why are we Muslims in the first place? Then you will realize these ideologies that they are coming through, yes, you can combat them. You're saying, look, these ideologies are actually ideologies of the nafs. It is all about making your nafs do whatever your nafs wants to do, yourself, your soul wants to do. As Muslims, as we return to Quran and Sunnah, you will be within a boundary, and that boundary is your protection. Now, I was speaking to a brother there earlier on saying how the hudud, the boundaries that Islam provides in terms of what we can't do, what we're not allowed to do, whether it's to do with, even violating other people's rights. Imagine you like someone's car and you say, I'm going to have it by force. I mean, you can't do that because you're violating the rights of someone else. So there has to be this restriction. Now, how does Islam maintain and preserve this boundary? By setting up certain rules and regulations. And of course, some people won't like these rules and regulations because it restricts them, restricts their freedom from getting it. Okay? So when you have a boundary, the hudud, and Islam is practiced within it, you will be safe. Safe from what? You'll be safe from the shackles that will be put through to you artificially by your own desires. Because your desires will make you its slave. You will be slave to your desires. You want to be slave to Allah. Yeah? So when you practice the hudud, implement the hudud in your lives, and you will see how the society functions. So when you have laws of crime and punishment, for example, of course the liberals and others will see it as very, very harsh. Of course they will, because it's a very severe punishment of, say, stealing. Why cutting off the hands of a thief? It's not just a normal punishment, is it? It's a very, very harsh punishment. Cutting off a hand is harsh punishment. Of course, the reasons are there to protect the individual and protect the society. Because I'll give you an example. Imagine the punishment for murder was 10 Turkish lira. Is it going to stop murdering? Because there are individuals out there who are very angry, very emotional, and they don't like you say, I've got 20 lira in my pocket. And if 10 lira is a punishment for murder, I can get away with 2 murders. It is not going to somehow give them this deterrent effect. Yeah? But if it was like, look, if you murder someone, you will be hanged or electrified or crucified, whatever, you'll be killed by the hands of justice. That individual will think twice. Yeah? So there is a deterrent effect. So Islamic punishment system, when the liberals looked at it like this is very harsh, this is backdated, barbaric, how can you do that? Because that's what you'll hear. Backdated, outdated, very harsh. The reasons are there. Because it has a very powerful deterrent effect. Go back to Islamic history and see how many people were punished, how many hands were chopped off when Islam was implemented in its entirety. That's what we should be looking at. So when you concentrate on this understanding of how Islam provides this boundary, it's for a reason. It is for the betterment of the society, and of course it will make you successful in the hereafter. So as Muslims then, what are our roles and responsibilities? What are our concerns? We need to go back to the understanding of Islam. We need to really say, look, I can understand there are alternatives put forward there, very appealing alternatives. Okay? Very appealing. Appealing to what? Emotions. But is it appealing to reason? Look at the Islamic society, the Islamic model, the Islamic framework. Contextually, as a whole, holistically. Compare with all the other models and see which models is just and fair and practical. That's what we should be doing. Because unless you compare and say, look, these ideas that you're giving about liberalism, as we have learned today, it contradicts on so many levels, even in societal aspects. But people still push forward this view because it's like an appealing alternative. What other alternatives are there? Islam, perhaps? The best alternative? No, we would say Islam is not the best alternative. Islam is the solution. That is how our mindset should be. That we should think that Islam is not providing an alternative. Remember, every time we have a discussion, we're thinking like, okay, let me give you an alternative. No, you're not giving an alternative. You're giving the solution. All the others are alternatives. And you see how the alternative, which one is a better alternative or not. And talking about backwardness and outdatedness, is democracy a new thing? Isn't that very, very backward, very outdated, thousands of years ago? And people are fighting for democracy. So it's not about how old the system is that makes it impractical for the society now. If that was the case, then everyone would have left democracy a long time ago. So Islam, just because it's 1439, 40 years ago, it doesn't mean it is not suitable today. It doesn't mean it cannot compete with the ideas of liberalism, the ideas of hedonism, whatever, materialism, all these concepts where it is free from the reality of worshipping Allah as He should be worshipped, because we are here for a reason. Let's not forget that. So, just summarizing the responsibilities and the things that we should do as Muslims. Number one, understand that we are Muslims. That's our identity. Islam is our identity. Yes, you can be born Turkish. Yes, you can be born a Pakistani or an Arab. Okay, that you can have this ethnic identity, but you chose to be a Muslim still today. That is what your identity should be. I am a Muslim because I've surrendered to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Since I have surrendered, then comes the next point. I will, of course, have some boundaries and limitations. And I will, of course, maintain those boundaries and limitations. And I will make sure that people understand why there are boundaries, why there are restrictions, why there are not assimilations between Islam and other. But there could be integration possible, but never assimilation. So do not assimilate into the ideas of all these isms. Maintain the boundary that you are a Muslim. And yes, I can be Muslim and I can be progressive. I can be Muslim and I can still have reason. Going back to the sister when you asked this question, that the conflict between conservatism and total, ideas of liberalism. No, Islam, as the brother said, is in the middle. We are ummatan wasata. We are in the middle where we do use reason, but the reason has limitations. We do use our intellect. We do use our ideas, what we call ijtihad, where we developed newer systems, newer models, newer framework based on the existing one that is provided from the Quran and Sunnah. So we are not going to say we have to choose either this end of total, literal conservatism, where there is no reason, we just follow blindly, or totally abandon everything and just go by reason only. No, come back in the middle. And that's where the solution is.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is, how do we convince fellow Muslims of the legitimacy of the Sharia over other ideologies, ethical and legal models?
Hijab.
Zakir, do you want to answer? Do you want to go first? Are you sure?
So, the legitimacy of the Sharia is established through the legitimacy of its primary text. And so obviously the difference, because someone could argue there is an axiomacity and all those things of these other world systems, but how can you prove Islam? And that's a whole discussion. We say that the Quran is composed of ayat, which literally means an ayah is a sign, is an evidence in and of itself. And it has 6,236 such ayat. So Allah is telling us in a sense that look at the Quran and you'll find all the evidence you'll need. Once you accept the authority of the primary sources, then the injunctions and prescriptions, which are extensions from that authority, are naturally accepted as well. And once you accept the primacy of the Quran and Sunnah, then you reject everything else as a matter of fact, because it comes from the all-knowing, al-alim, al-khabir, al-hakim. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the all-knowing, the all-aware, the all-wise. So if we accept that the text come from such an entity, then it's impossible for us to have anything better than it in terms of injunctions, prescriptions or laws. And that will be the model, inshallah.
Just to add to that.
Yeah.
When it comes to people who are secularists or atheists or liberalism, etc., one thing you've got to bear in mind, and every time a person who believes in God debates with an atheist, for example, we always bring up the argument of subjective and objectivity. Who can objectively prove what is right or wrong? An atheist can never do that. For example, somebody commits a crime, one person's opinion is he should be executed, the other one, no, he should go to jail for 5 years and serve half the time, etc. These are just personal opinions. Whereas when you bring God into the picture, you have an objective criteria to say whether something is morally right or wrong. Now, when it comes to religions then, for example, the Christians will have a certain morality that they get from their scriptures, Hindus will have a certain way of looking at things probably that they get from their scriptures. Then we have to look at which scripture can be authentically and historically traced to its source, etc. And then that's the debate of the Bible, does it go back to the prophets, etc.? Does the Quran go back to Prophet Muhammad and peace? Is there proof for his prophethood, etc.? So then we can objectively see what would be right or wrong.
My question is in regards to, you said it's the job or responsibility of the ulama to do the interpretations. I feel like one of the biggest issues in our Muslim communities these days is the matter of interpretation, because I feel like any 16-year-old on Twitter will tell you, oh, this is how I interpret this, and especially with, for example, the issue of hijab, address the elephant in the room. Nowadays, like, everybody here knows someone who's taking up the hijab, and when you come to justify it, first of all, they don't justify it. They'll just tell you, I'm here in Germany, everyone's in Germany, and I feel like it's very hard to even engage with Muslims these days. They don't even want to have conversation or not even up for any, civilized conversation about things like, oh yeah, you're all whatever. So if you guys want to comment on this, in regards to interpretations, you said that it's a duty of ulama. Who exactly is an ulama? Because I feel like these days, MA masters in Islamic studies will tell you it should be our interpretation, and who is classed as an alim, for example, if that's the easier to address it. Because there's a Malati alim, he'll do his own thing, and then obviously it'll come contradiction to the other stuff, if that's clear, if that is it. Thank you.
That's an interesting question, and the answer to that question is found in a lot of the works of scholars that have written about this. For example, Shawkani has written something about this, and he talks about the prerequisites of an alim, and he mentions like 7 or 8 different prerequisites. They have to know, they have to have a deep knowledge of the Arabic language. They have to have memorized the ayat of ahkam, at least, of the Quran. Some say you have to memorize the Quran, and so on. And there is a degree of subjectivity as to what counts as an alim. But in essence, really, an alim is someone who can do istinbat. And the evidence of that is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَعَلِمَهُ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَنْبِطُونَهُ مِنْهُم. That the people that can do istinbat would have known it from, this is in Surah An-Nisa, وَلَوْ رَدُّهُ إِلَى الرَّسُولِ وَإِلَى أُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْهُمْ لَعَلِمَهُ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَنْبِطُونَهُ مِنْهُم. That if they brought it back to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and the people of istinbat. So the istinbat is the process of extrapolation. Yes? These are the ulama, the people that can access at least the usul, that they can understand how to extrapolate, etc. Now, in terms of what the ummah has accepted, obviously you have the Sahaba, they're the ulama. Any Sahabi is alim, then you have gradation in terms of that. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani mentions who are the specialists in what field. Ibn Mas'ud, for example, is a specialist in the Quran. Ibn Abbas is a specialist in the Quran and has the tazkiyah of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَإِنْ آمَنُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا آمَنْتُمْ بِهِ فَقَدْ اهْتَدَوْا, which is very interesting as well. If they believe in what you guys believe in, then they are on the right path. Meaning the Sahaba. He didn't say مَا آمَنْتَ بِهِ, it's مَا آمَنْتُمْ بِهِ, which is directly talking to the primary audience. So there is evidence from the Quran that the first ulama are the Sahaba. After that, those who they have given the permission to, if you like, those who they have given the tazkiyah to, the tabi'in, the atba' tabi'in. Obviously in that, you have Abu Hanifa was the first one of the 4 schools of thought, and people like him in his time, Ibrahim al-Nakhai, al-Awza'i, and others, and then afterwards the 4 schools of thought, and those people who understood their works and the direct disciples of those particular 4 schools, the scholars. Al-Bukhari, no one's going to mention that Bukhari is not a scholar. It's very difficult to make the case, It gets a bit hazy, like you said, now in the contemporary world, where we identify, is this person alim, if this person is not alim. There are a few things you can look out for. If there are people of high prominence, which are referred to as ulama, that agree that this person is alim, then usually that person is counted as alim. Number two, if that person has made a contribution, a publication, but it's accepted within the field as a legitimate contribution, its access is being responded to, is being referenced. That's another way of finding out if someone is a alim. You don't see the person making rudimentary mistakes or on issues which are rudimentary or otherwise, then these things. And obviously, if they have a large following, sometimes that can be an indication, but sometimes it can't be. That's a double-edged sword. So that requires, it's not enough to just have someone with a large following. They have to have a large following. Among them are the academics. Among them are those people of knowledge as well. But there is always going to remain a degree of subjectivity to it. We can't solve the problem completely. There's no magic cure here. In terms of the hijab, sorry, I forgot that part of the question. And this is my way of, yes, it's a very good point, yeah, of the hijab. And I think I've got a way of dealing with it now. I've been thinking about it. I've actually been thinking about it quite deeply. And there are some people in the ummah now that they believe, this is their perspective, yeah. There are dhanni verses and qat'i verses. There are verses of qata', which means that they are explicit, and there are dhanni verses. And they say, look, if the verse is dhanni, it means that you can have different ijtihadat, you can have different understandings, etc. Let us interpret it in whatever ways. There should be a plurality of ideas. And if you extend that idea to its logical extreme, yeah, and you say there should be a plurality of ideas, and you have no right to tell me what the predecessors said, you have no right to tell me كيف انعقد الإجماع من قبل, how the ijma' was came into being before, and all those things. You have no right to tell me those things. I say, no problem. If that is your madhab, if that is your belief, I say, so what do you say of the ijtihad of ISIS? They're forced to actually accept that, you know that. They can only say, la darar wa la darar, it's hurting the people, but ISIS extremist group that killed the people and they're bad. But according to your hermeneutical understanding of the Quranic discourse, their interpretation of the ayat of qatl and killing and of hum minhum and killing the children and all of those things, according to their interpretation, according to your methodology, you have to admit from a hermeneutical perspective, from an exegetical perspective, is absolutely acceptable. There's no way out of this now. If you allow for a plurality of ideas in such a way, you have to allow for the ijtihad. You can't let inkar now. You can't say that they're wrong. You can only say they're wrong for moral reasons. But it will be a circular argument because the morals they're saying are from the Quran and Sunnah anyways. So if they want to do that, so if you want to expand the parameters so that non-specialists, that people of that we can make new rulings now which were never made before. And this is a key thing, not only in just Islamic law, but in all of legalistic traditions. There's something called precedent. Yeah, they use case law in many countries. They say, let's see the judgments of those who came before us. They don't make new judgments unless it's a new case. If it's the same case, they look at the judgments that came before. But if we're talking about the same rulings that happened for 1,400 years, and now you, X-person, thinks that you know how to reinterpret the ayat of Surah An-Nur and the ayat of Surah Al-Ahzab and so on, then no problem. You also, if you want to expand the parameters to that extent, then allow for the interpretation of all of those extremist radicals that blow people up, etc., because that's also ijtihad. Another thing of doing it is an interesting thing. There's a verse, I think it's chapter 24, verse 59. Yes, Surah An-Nur, where it says, Al-Qawa'id min al-Nisa. The old women of the Nisa, of the old women of the old women, yeah? And it says that they can they can take their thiyab off. What's thiyab? It's a clothing, yeah? Now, the first question I ask the person who believes that, because usually the person who believes that the hijab is not, the khimar is not the hijab. That's their argument, yeah? Their argument that the khimar mentioned in Surah An-Nur and the jilbab, Surah Al-Ahzab, those two, they believe that they are not hijab, over the head. They believe it's over the breasts. They believe it's what? Over the breasts. So when it says فَلْيَضْرِبْنَ بِخُمُرِهِنَّ عَلَى جُوبِهِنَّ, so let them throw the khimars over their jube. They say it just means cover your breasts. So I say, okay, no problem. In chapter 24, verse 59, when it talks about those old women, is it saying that they can show their breasts? No. That's what the implication is. If the thiyab that they can take off is the khimar, and the khimar or the jilbab is what you cover your breast, then according to you, you can take off. Yes, you can show the older woman now. She can show her breast in public. Is this your interpretation? They usually run around saying no, this and that. And listen, this is the implication of what you're saying, and that's why you have to have a holistic, contextualized understanding of the Quran and Sunnah before you make humiliating mistakes. So that's why I'd probably play it around like that, yeah, inshallah.
Thank you very much for your talk, said, and I have 2 comments to. It's more comments than questions. First one is our problem is liberalism for Muslim people. It's an epistemological problem when I say that on the question is, can the human mind be independent from anything else to know what's good or what's bad? And that's what I think Imam Kant talked about in his article, What's Enlightenment, when he defined the brave mind. He said that it is the mind that can be independent from everything supernatural or metaphysical. So we don't need anything religious. So I think for me it's not like that, because mind still need supernatural things to tell what's good, what's right, what's bad. And if you ask some persons here what's good or bad in one's creation, I think we have several answers. Because of that, we need prophets. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent them to give us what's good, what's right, what's bad. That will lead us to another problem in liberalism, and it affects 2 very basic principles in Islam. The first one is the source of legislation. And who is the one has the right to legislate in this world? I'm talking about Muslims, not other Muslims, because for other Muslims, non-Muslims, they will debate with that and they will say whatever they want. But for Muslims, who has the right to legislate? Because why I'm talking about Muslims? Because now we have these versions in our countries, in Muslim countries. They adopt liberalism and they want to say that no, the religion is your personal choice. It's not. We are not obligated to be submitted to Islamic judgments or other things. And the other principle that was affected by liberalism is the principle of al-ma'ruf nahy anil munkar. When we say that liberalism is adopting the individualism, so in Islam it's not like that, because let's say about the social ethics in the Muslim societies, it is the duty of all people to keep it. So when we say someone is doing something bad, it is how to say, it's for all society to treat this bad thing. So it's not like you can do whatever you want. I think it's the most thing.
How can we give a convincing answer to liberal aspects why Islam doesn't give equality to men and women, for example, matters such as witness testimony and inheritance?
The Prophet Muhammad said that men are equal to women, yeah, and this is musawiyat. Some scholars say this means musawiyat. Shaqa'iq is musawiyat. However, there are notable exceptions between men and women in certain things, such that men have certain rights and responsibilities that women don't have, and vice versa. Do you know, it's interesting, we'll talk about human rights, because what the communitarians actually say, going back to this, because it will link in a second, the communitarians say we shouldn't be a rights-obsessed culture, yeah? and they say that rights and responsibilities go hand in hand, basically, yeah? So, you know, we always say, what are the rights of the man? What are the rights of the woman? And so on, yeah? What are the rights of individuals and human beings? What are the rights of nations? What are the rights? And so on. We have a universal declaration of human rights, but we don't have a universal declaration of human responsibilities, right? And that's what the communitarians would argue, say rights and responsibilities go hand in hand. The witness in Islam, the shahid, is different to a rawi, by the way. A rawi is a narrator. And by the way, both of them fulfill the same practical functionality. They do. A rawi of the hadith, they narrate the hadith. And they're basically narrating it all the way back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And as we know, the greatest ruwat of the hadith, some of them are women. And one woman equaled one man in that context, as a narrator of hadith. And that's more important than anything else, because you're transmitting the deen, the religion of Islam. You're telling me what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. You're telling, your ruling here, or your narration here, has so much practical implication for my life, that not only will I accept it, but future generations, etc., will accept it, and so on. So, as a narrator, there is no suspect or indifferent treatment or something like that, yeah, between men and women. Really, the truth is, it's as a witness that we have to talk about, yeah, as a witness. Now, why do we always say that why do women have less rights as witnesses? Why don't we say why do women have less responsibilities? And I'll give you an example, right? Punitively and classically, what happens to witnesses if they are seen to speak falsehood? Tell me, someone put their hands up, tell me what happens. Yes. They get lashed. Lashed. Yes? Even in some cases in the Sharia, according to classical theory, or classical books, etc., if 4 people come, one of them is lying, all of them get lashed. Yeah? You know this. Believe me. Believe me, yeah? If this was the case and a woman was being lashed and she didn't do anything wrong, you know what the West would say to you? How can you give this woman lashes and she did nothing wrong? You never think of witness testimony as responsibility. Why do you not think of it as responsibility? You can get whipped if you even just being part of the process, you get whipped. You see what I'm trying to say? You can flip this whole thing around by saying, if we did have the same responsibilities for men and women in this bab, in this context here, then there would be complaints, because you would say, why are women being whipped and punished, etc.? It's not something you want to be. You don't want to be a witness in Islam. Why is it seen as a good? Because we're entrenched in this rights culture. Oh, you have a right to 2 votes, 2 witness testimony if you're a man. You have responsibility that's more than a woman now. You can be whipped for doing nothing wrong, in a sense. You have to be put in a position of social responsibility. So Allah has alleviated a woman from that to a great extent. And so has the Sunnah. Isn't this exactly what the feminists would have wanted anyways? Think about it. It's giving women preferential treatment. How is this seen as, I mean, I always see this as quite ironic. Why is it that one man's witness testimony? That's preferential treatment for women, considering the punitive repercussions of a woman, yes, or a man in this case, making a false testimony, or someone in his group of testimonies, people that give testimonies, give a false testimony, all of them get whipped. So it's a lack of understanding of the religion, lack of understanding of rights culture, this whole thing of rights. Yes, men have more rights. Yeah, sometimes they do, yeah. Sometimes men have more rights than women in Islam, no problem. But they also have more responsibilities. And this is what, subhanAllah, At-Tabari said in his verse, when he said, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلِدْ رِجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةً. He says this daraja, because Allah says that they are, وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. They have the same as what they get, بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. وَلِلْرِجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةً. And that for men is a degree of responsibility among them. At-Tabari says this is mas'uliyah, it's responsibility. So this is, Tabari died 324 AD. He's part of, if you want to call it that, the Salaf. He's the first Mufassir. You know, he's not a liberal apologist. This is his belief. Yeah? So what I'm trying to say is that we shouldn't always look at rights as only rights. They're rights and responsibilities. And when you consider all of those factors, then you realize that it's a mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He doesn't put women in that position. Because if they are put in that position, they're physically weaker than men. And that's almost any feminist would tell you that, as a matter of fact. No, don't get angry, sister, now I'm joking. Almost any sister would tell you, feminist would tell you this, yeah? And that's the reality. So why would they be put in a position where they're susceptible to more physical pain in the context of an Islamic state? Of course, we don't mean this in the context, because this stuff doesn't mean much in the context of other than an Islamic state. So considering all those points, I think the inheritance is not true, by the way, to say that men get more than women. What did you say? Yes, it's not true. Look at the verses in Surah An-Nisa. There are many cases, many cases where women get more than men. Yeah? وَإِن كُنَّ نِسَاءً فَوْقَ اثْنَتَيْنِ فَلَهُنَّ ثُلُثَا مَا تَرَكَ. If there were more than 2 girls, then they get 2/3 of what has been distributed. That is the highest amount of any distribution given to females. So in this case, if there's men and women, yes, but the boys and there's only daughters, there's no sons. What the right thing to say is the son gets the most. That's completely true. Yeah. If you say the son gets the most, للذكر مثل حظ الأنثيين, that the son gets the amount of 2. We're talking about the son versus the daughter in that context. We're not talking about 2 brothers and sisters. We're not talking about mother and father. Because we know that, yeah, if there's a son, they get one thuluth. If there's no son, they get 1 thuluth, which is, if there's a son, they get 1/6. If there's no son, they get 1/3, and so on. And so the mother and father get the same. And they're man and woman. But why is that not seen as? So it's clear here that there's an economic reason, obviously, of redistribution, yeah? The son has more responsibilities in Islam. He has to pay mahr and whatnot is gonna be, you know, بما أنفقوا من أموالهم الرجال قوامون على النساء بما فضل الله بعضهم على وبما أنفقوا من أموالهم. And because they have to give now, so the son has to give more than the daughter, and therefore he's given a little bit more of a subsidy, if you like, through the inheritance. It makes perfect sense through this economic redistribution model. So what's the problem? I mean, once again, they see things in black and white because they're obsessed with rights culture. They have understanding of equality which has to be completely fixed. Although they themselves don't have fixed equality. In my country that I live in, my country you can say, no problem. You know, women get 1 year maternity leave. If they have a baby, they're off work 1 year paid. Men get 2 weeks. It's not equality. You know, what's going on here? Say, well, it's a biological difference to say that. So if you agree that different things should be treated differently because of their difference, once again, say that one more time for the people. Okay. Different things should be treated differently on account of their difference. If you agree with that premise, then don't ask questions about why this. I'm not asking you, but for the feminists, don't ask questions about why is this different to this and why is that different to this, right? So,
I think we need to wrap up because it's time now.
Wrap up, yes.
I think we've got last question.
Last question, if I can ask. Is there anyone who will ask?
Okay, our brother has a question. Just got the mic already.
I will first start to thanking Siga Civil Society for holding this event, and I will thank you for accepting this invitation. Well, I studied political science here in this university, and you know, the title is Liberalism. We can change it, put democracy, we can change it, put secularism, and we, the Muslim, we have this great gift. Like, we can address the problems like so easy, and just we will lay down in the couch, we will drink tea and eat falafel. Like, we do nothing. I'm so sorry. So we address the problems, then we sit. As just my sister Khadija addressed the problems of who are the scholars and what they can do and how they will do it. My question is actually, like, I have so many comments in sense, like, when the Prophet passed away, so for Khulafa al-Rashidin, different types of political systems, how they rule the country. Then until Muawiyah came and destroyed everything. No need to mention that stuff. My question is, like, do the Muslim scholars are not able to produce a new political system, a new political ideology that can work and function in these days? Since when we will take liberalism, we have problem. When we will take secularism, we have problem. And please, like, I know you will say, like, we have to go to Sharia. Which Sharia? Which interpretation? You know, like, I don't know, Maliki will interpret it different regarding to the political system that we use. Muslims in day-to-day life, they are amazing. When it came to political system and how they will rule the country, I don't know, some will say, like, you have to follow the head of the state, even he will, like, يجلد ظهرك, even he will slap your back, you know what I mean? So my question is, do the Muslim the scholars are not able to produce a new political system? Are they or are they are not? If yes, how it will be, or if not, why they are not? And thanks.
I have got a comment, if I may allow to say. You can interpret it in the way that the Prophet ﷺ interpreted it. Like how the Prophet ﷺ did, you can do the same. Why are you following the others, right? Like this is the way, which is the most sensitive answer. Right. By the way, I have got a question, if we're allowed to ask.
Let him ask. We're here in Turkey. Right. Yes.
Actually, my question is, first of all, I want to thank you for coming here and giving this important lecture. My question is, it's not just a question, I just want to ask about our duties as a youngsters here to stop, the people who are trying to brainwash the Muslims youth. So what's your comments, guys? What do you advise?
You mean how to stop them, or why should we stop them?
How to stop them?
Look, Zakir?
Yeah.
Well, I can speak from personal experience. Growing up in the UK, I didn't have much pride in the deen. I fell very far from the deen for a good 10 years, and I took pride in other things like music stars and movie stars, etc. And that made me live a very secular lifestyle. The biggest advice I can give to Muslims to curb this is we need to reignite our pride in our deen and our religion, and we have to do that by reading our sources, especially the life of the Prophet Muhammad and peace and the Sahaba, etc. And when you read their life, as I personally did, you will gain a newfound respect for your deen, and you'll understand the power of Islam and the real reason why Islam spread like it did. It didn't spread by the sword. That's propaganda against us. Read your sources, get to know Prophet Muhammad and peace, and the people who don't know him, give them a copy of a biography of the Prophet, peace be upon him. When we get to know our sources properly, we will have our own pride in our deen, and we will not be influenced by outside forces. That's my personal opinion, and I advise every person here to read our sources, especially the biography of the Prophet Muhammad and peace.
Other question? The other brother first. Yes, in regards to what political system, we have to think about two things. One, the course of history hasn't shown us that Muslims have not been able to manage countries. That's an Orientalist understanding of our history. Obviously, there were times in our history, not just the Khulafa al-Rashidun, Mahdiyun, but others that came after that, where we were the leading empire. And obviously the infrastructure in place was put in place. The Ottomans had a very, very sophisticated bureaucracy, and they didn't require any, white English colonists to come and tell them how to manage the situation. So I'm telling you that I think there is this Orientalist understanding of our history which needs to be revisited and reassessed. The comment on Muawiyah, I don't agree with it, because obviously at the time of Muawiyah there was relative peace. When he was actually in charge, people don't realize that when he was in charge there was relative peace. Obviously there was wars, yes, and we don't deny those wars ever happened, but there was long periods of peace in his premiership, which needs to also be accounted for. The idea of this movement from Khulafa al-Rashidun Mahdiyun and to this idea of monarchism, or like the idea of a monarchy, to mulkun aam, which is what the Prophet Muhammad he predicted. He said this is what's going to happen. This is actually a prediction from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said that this was going to happen. You're going to start off with 30 years of khilafah, and this is going to be the Khulafa al-Rashidun. And this hadith is in Muslim Ahmed. And actually, if you add up all the four Khulafa, it's exactly 30 years, by the way. And then this was, so all of these things are predicted. There are areas in the Sharia where you can do your own ijtihad, and areas of the Sharia where you can't. So an effective political system is where you put everything into the situation. You have someone who knows. You need people to know the waqi' of the situation in that particular country, the real situation there. They need to collaborate very well with the scholars of Islam, and there needs to be a good liaison between those two parties. And then we do like any other nation would do. We come to conclusions as to how we should move forward. And I don't think Turkey is doing that badly, actually, come to think about it, in terms of political and economic systems. I don't think many, even now, I mean, they're not doing that badly. And I think that is going on to some extent, even though it's not as it used to be historically for political reasons. But having said all of that, I think generally speaking, the door of ijtihad is not closed. So there is the matter of, like you said, there's the balance between ijtihad and you do your own kind of rationalizing of the situation and connecting that directly and inextricably with the nusus al-shari'ah, the kitab and sunnah. And that's how we're going to come, inshallah, to success in this world and the hereafter, because it's not just all about this world. We're not economic materialists. That's not what we're striving for. We also have ukhrawi, we have like hereafter ambitions as well, inshallah.
I think with that we should wrap up here, because it's gone beyond the time now, unless the organizers are okay with that. Yeah, Linda, please.
Assalamu alaikum, my name is Linda and I'm a senior research associate at the Center for Islam and Global Affairs, and at the same time I'm also an advisor for the Student Society. First of all, I would like to very much thank our speaker, Mohammed Hijab, for coming here. It has certainly been a pleasure to us to listen to you, and also other brothers for joining the Q&A. It has been really fruitful, and I have enjoyed this session, and I'm sure that the others have also done so. I mean, we can see this from the amount of questions, obviously. I would just like to have one last question here. I think we didn't much talk about the societal level of liberalism and its effect on the Muslim communities, especially in the Western context. We have been talking quite a lot about the, the daily practices and about our iman and aqidah and these issues. But how I see it from the perspective where I come from, I'm studying Islamophobia, and I'm also looking at these initiatives, so-called liberal Muslim initiatives or liberal Muslim mosques that we do have, for example, in Germany. I'm not so sure how many you might have in the UK. For certain, there are some. In any case, I would like to know, what would your advice be for those Muslim youth in the Western context who are struggling with this dichotomy of, on the other hand, yes, we do have the extremist groups, and we are constantly under the pressure of distancing ourselves from them, right? But then on the other hand, we are now experiencing this, growing trend of liberal Muslim, movements and these mosques, and especially I see it very detrimental to the wider Muslim community, because that is the kind of voice that gets heard in the society, because they are certainly supported by the states, and this all has to do also with the CVE, these kind of prevent programs. So what would your advice be for those Muslim youth in the Western context? How can we basically, find a way to, handle the situation in such a manner that we don't get demonized if we do not agree to these liberal views, right? And at the same time, we won't be seen as, radicals. And with this question, I would like to end this wonderful event. And then also, by the way, we do have ikramiyat outside, so there is chai and some cookies for those who want to stay for further discussion. Thank you. How, we agree on this, right? Like the interpretation and everything, okay. But what I'm targeting here is that when we in the West, where I also come from, or in Europe, let's forget the word West anyway, so okay. Yeah. So in Europe, for example, so when we there as our Muslim communities they are diverse, all right? But when there are these certain groups that do get the voice, they get the voice in the media, they get the voice on the policy level, they get the support of the state. They are also at the same time involved in CVE activities. They are engaging in all of these things that further, harm other Muslims. They are demonizing everybody else, right? This is becoming the dominating narrative. This is becoming the Islam that we are supposed to live in our countries. Now, what I'm, wondering is that how those Muslims who still want to get a voice, want to have representation in the society, want to be active citizens, contribute to the well-being of the society and the ummah in our countries, how do we, in the most strategic way, tackle this issue of being marginalized at this point? We are being marginalized from the side of the liberals, but we're also being marginalized on that level where, only because you're Muslim, you're already, the other, all right? So how do we fight these, narratives that are becoming, dominating, and we don't necessarily want to sign to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I do understand it more clearly now. So I think one word answer with this in this case would be da'wah, because what we have left today, majority of the people that I see in the society, especially in Europe and maybe in the West in particular, is many of the people have now become sort of me and my family, and everybody else doesn't matter. No, that's not how it is. As Muslims, basically how the people in the past, the ulamas, and we have to now take the responsibility, because the prophethood has stopped. So who's going to now call the people towards the good and stop and forbid them from the evil? The amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy anil munkar is something which is now upon us as the ummah. If we have stopped giving da'wah, and if we have stopped teaching our kids the Islam that they are supposed to learn from us as our responsibility, then why would we now look at the other people and blame them that now they are getting the voice, they're getting the airtime, they're getting all this, basically all the newspapers want to now be interested in them? It's because we ourselves have let our own children down, our own society down, and our own Muslim brothers and sisters down. Because the thing is, Islam is not something people learn from the day they're born. It is something that has to be taught, just like any other field, whether it's engineering, doctors, medicine, I don't know, I mean, whatever it is, it's something that you have to learn. And the same thing with Islam, that you have to teach your children, and you have to teach your brothers and sisters around the world what is the right, what is that they're supposed to do, which is legal and which is illegal, what is halal and what is haram. So these are the basic things that we should learn, but many times we don't learn. And there are students who go to universities who pick up all these wrong ideas from the neoconservatives and also from the liberals and the seculars, and they come home and they ask their parents, what should we now do with regards to this situation? Obviously the parents might not know what to do. So instead of them consulting the people of knowledge, the ulamas or whoever is responsible in the society who has got the knowledge to address that particular problem, they just say, be a good Muslim, pray 5 times or read the Quran, and that's it. But without them actually taking the initiative that if they don't know the answer to the question, take that child to someone who can actually answer, whether it's an imam of the masjid or whether it's some learned scholar in your community. And there's always someone out there who would be able to implement who would be able to answer or address that particular point. But if you just leave it, then that problem doesn't solve itself. It has to be solved from the proper channels, and those channels are still available out there. So, of course, the media today in the West, in particular, they will give more airtime to such people who are the fringe, and also the extremists who are also the fringe. They will not give people who are following the true Sunnah and the true Quran and the Sunnah. They will not give them, because it's not something that is in their interest. And that is one of the reasons you'll see Islamophobia as well, because these people are now given more airtime, so they think that is Islam, but it's not. And as you know, that most of us here actually go to Speaker's Corner basically to remedy this problem, because that's one place which not only, and I would say thanks to the West as well for giving us this freedom to go there and to speak. So this freedom is something that's available in the West. It's not like you're being hindered from that, but it's just that you're not taking that opportunity to make use of it. Now nobody's going to stop you anywhere to teach them the Quran and the Sunnah. obviously there might be exceptions, but I'm not talking about exceptions. Most of Europe, you're still allowed to go and teach them this, the Quran and the Sunnah. Nobody's going to stop you. So in Speaker's Corner, what we do is that there are a lot of people who have these misconceptions and the wrong ideas about what Islam truly is. And so I don't think either ISIS or anybody else is going to stop you there from telling you the haqq. And alhamdulillah, with channels like SC Dawa and other channels like EF Dawa, and we have spread this message across the globe. So many of the misconceptions are now addressed in that little place called Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park in London. So yes, there's always a way. Like they say, where there's a will, there's a way. And inshallah, if we go through the right channels, we should be able to defeat not only Islamophobia, but also the misconceptions about Islam. And especially with social media today, you youngsters, myself, I mean, I'm still young, alhamdulillah. So we can solve this. I mean, there are ways which we didn't have before. For example, if I wanted to get my message across today, I can actually go and tweet, or I can put it on Facebook, or I can shout it out from Speaker's Corner and it'll be on YouTube, and it'll be available, accessible globally. You know, this is something our forefathers did not have as a tool. This is a powerful medium which we all should use, and specifically for dawah, inshallah.
To add something on the hijab on this issue.
If I understand the question correctly, you're saying that you've got all of these kind of liberalizing policies from top down, and that obviously in terms of who the Western elites want to kind of promote the message of is going to be a Muslim with a liberal message. And I agree with that, but that's why it's important to have a degree of self-sufficiency and self-dependence in this regard. So there's 2 or 3 things I'll add to this conversation. One of them is that I've been thinking about the differences between the United States of America and the United Kingdom, because I've been doing some travels to the United States, looking at the data there. And what I found is that, I don't want to generalize it, there are many differences in terms of country, etc. It's a much bigger country. The USA is like the size of Europe, and the United Kingdom's got about 66 million population. But in terms of apostasy, and this was one thing I focused on because it reveals a lot. In terms of apostasy, according to Pew Research, 23% of Muslims apostate in the United States. Yeah, that's a quarter of Muslims apostate at an older age. The census data in the United Kingdom shows a much lower number, maybe less than 1%. Demographic data shows it's once again much lower in Europe generally, but in the United Kingdom, I was looking at in particular. And so the academic exercise, that was not something I formally did, but in my mind I was thinking, what are the differences between the United Kingdom and the United States? And there are 2 or 3 things I kind of picked up on. One of them was community, and that's one big theme. They say it takes a village to raise a child, you know, and it takes a community to keep Muslims steadfast. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. But it's all in the jama'ah. You know, meaning it's in a plural form, meaning that if we want preservation of religion to be a maqsad al-maqasid sharia, objective sharia to be fulfilled, then it has to be a communal effort. And even in countries like, frankly, like our countries in the East, Turkey, Egypt, Tunisia, North Africa, Pakistan, and those countries, you'll find that there are communities which are much more quote-unquote secular, liberal, and by extension usually further away from the religion, and other communities which are not like that. And I think there should be a different strategy for each of those different situations. And here's my recommendation. Yeah. Generally speaking, it depends. People of that nation have to come together and kind of look at the data themselves and have a strategy. But in terms of the West, I believe, even though it doesn't fit the Western agenda to kind of be grouped in one location, one geographic location, it helps us economically, it helps us politically and socially with preservation of religion and of the Muslim identity. So in other words, Muslims in Germany, in France, in London, in Birmingham, the reason, one thing they should do is come together. So in other words, literally live next to each other. You should make it, when you're looking to buy a flat or a property, you should look for Muslim areas. That's what you should do. Now that's not what they want you to do, because they want you to kind of be dispersed so that they can throw in their kind of. It's easier to take down one person than it is to take down 100. Yeah, and it's easier to take down if one person's by themselves. It's easy, but when you have a whole community behind you, you have that confidence. Person's going to the masjid. That is a big thing. It keeps the person preserved in terms of religion. So, one recommendation: if you're living in Europe, general rule. Look for Muslim areas and live there. Don't live in non-Muslim areas. I know it sounds a bit... You can, with your family, you can do it. If you have very strong will and determination, etc. If you have a choice, live in the Muslim areas. Because economically, at least, you can start your own kind of economies in that area. You can, and so on. In non-Muslim countries, in Muslim countries, it might be the opposite strategy. It might be that the religious need to actually go into the secular areas and start doing dawah and whatnot. But it's too dangerous to do that in the non-Muslim world, because the data has shown us that we can't be stung by the same insect twice. Obviously, they could lead to a lack of preservation of religion. So, whereas in the West, it makes more sense to come together. In the East, it might not make more sense. But that depends upon the independent ijtihad of the people of that particular country. They have to look at things and data and actually sociologically assess things. Second thing is social media, and he's already kind of mentioned that. Now we have to exploit the fact that globalization is a worldwide phenomenon now, technology and so on. And the only way to compete with media now is social media. You can't compete with media easily. It's very, very expensive to start your own channel. We've looked at the numbers and figures. We know channels, I know how much they spend on licenses and whatnot. It's an expensive thing, and it's unnecessarily expensive because social media you can reach more numbers with social media. So you have to have a social media influence. I think we should have now kind of a wave in that, in Turkish language, in Arabic language, in all these things. We have to popularize our narrative through social media. That's a very important point that Hashim mentioned, which I totally agree with. That's another part of our strategy which we should totally put into play. Finally, I would say that in terms of economics, I'll tell you one thing. The Ahmadi community, I was one guy is Ahmadi, which is a group of people that believe there was a prophet after Prophet Muhammad. Anyways, they have a very tightly knit community, and he was showing me, how they organize themselves. And they organize themselves in a very disciplined way in terms of economics. So, I'm not saying that we should have preferential, because we have laws in place in the West. We can't just have religion discrimination, etc. But there's nothing saying that, for example, you can't form networks, economic networks, helping people of the same religion, for example, find jobs, education, and so on. The Jews do it, the Ahmadis do it, and they're very successful in doing so, and they help their people by doing that. So these are defense mechanisms that have been attempted by people of the past and have been successful. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Jewish communities that do that and are successful in doing that, we should follow that. Why do we always try and follow them in other things? like theological misapplications of monotheism. Rather, we should follow them in these things which have worked for them. So 3 things. Number 1, community. Social community is very important. It takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a community to preserve people's religion and identity. Number 2, social media, because it's important. And connected to that is also education, by the way. Education, if you can make your own schools and stuff like that, do it with an Islamic ethos. And number 3, what did we say was number 3? Who's listening? Huh? Yeah, the economy. So try and develop some kind of networks, to help Muslim brothers and sisters. And that will help the sense of camaraderie and fraternity between Muslim brothers and sisters, and also help them develop in society, etc. And these are my recommendations.
Yeah, just to add on that point, the reason why we have this power imbalance is because we're weak. So there has to be some strong lobbying which is absent from the Muslim communities. Just like in other communities, just you mentioned, they're very, very powerful lobbying. And because of this, they get their voices heard and they get their wants already implemented. So we need, on top of all these recommendations, a very strong lobby worldwide, globally. Because if you cannot maintain this power imbalance, then you will constantly have this problem. So Muslims have to bring back the balance, bring back the power, bring back the authority, bring back the izzah of the Muslims. And how we can do that is the question that we have to ask another time. you.
I think it's also important that we actually thank those people who made this this particular lecture and this meeting possible, and of course Sister Linda, who made it possible to have this event, and also all the brothers, including our media channel here, Sidawa, alhamdulillah, made it possible for us to not only have this event be appreciated by the audience here, but inshallah will be appreciated by all those who will watch it online once it's on YouTube. Inshallah. Jazakallah khairan for your patience, and apologies for going over the time which was fixed earlier, but Jazakallah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We as Student Society, we thank our distinctive speakers. It was really a fruitful speech and Q&A session. And I also thank you, all of you, for coming here, sparing your time in such a weekend for such important topic, of course. And it's already Maghrib time, and you can have your cookies and tea up there. And hope to see you in our upcoming events, inshallah. Thank you very much.